Thanks for joining. This is the architectural best practices throughout the lifecycle session. I just want to say that this is a level 200 session, so it's not a super deep dive. It's about foundational guidance to set you up for long-term success. That's the idea. So here's what to expect. The first thing is I'll introduce your speakers. Obviously, I'm one of them. We'll then cover what cloud optimization is, because it's a set of words that may mean different things to different people, so we'll tell you how we see it. We'll then cover the journey of going through cloud optimization and how that looks over time. So we'll cover things like the workload life cycles and the journey of adopting and sharing best practices. We'll then switch speakers and we'll go over a couple of the tools you can use and some examples of those tools, followed by a customer success story. So we're very lucky to be able to have a customer with us today. So I'll quickly cover who the speakers are. I'm Brad, or Bradley. Jeff is here from Accor, and he's flown all the way from France with Charles, who is one of our solution architects, to tell you, how they took what I'm going to share and made it their own. As we start, and before we sort of get into what cloud optimization is, think about the questions you ask yourself as you go through maybe migrating workloads, maybe building new workloads in cloud. It's quite a big audience, so the assumption here is some of you are probably pretty mature and you know what you're doing. Some of you probably are looking at POCs and early stage of using AWS and cloud tech. So we're trying to cover this for both of you because there's parts of it that you should consider as you mature throughout that journey. Right, so questions you ask yourself. Do you ask yourself, how do I promote standardization? So think about if you're running a large organization or even a small organization, are different teams of people doing different things? How do I control my costs? And that's, I think, a big part of what cloud optimization instills or infers, right, is cost control. How do I strengthen my systems against outages? So you're looking for things like resilience and making sure you can withstand failures. And how do I ensure my teams adhere to governance, compliance, the sort of control frameworks that you have across your organizations as well? What is cloud optimization, though? We learned that it can mean different things to different builders, but this is the way we see it. So the important thing here is, and I only briefly introduced myself because it's not too important, but what is, you may have noticed my business title says cloud optimization in it. So it's our team's full-time job to make sure we bring you guidance on making the most out of your journey with the cloud. And you've got to think long-term vision, long-term success. You will make trade-offs along the way, but ultimately, this is how we see it. So it is the act of designing, building, and running your workloads to bring the best possible value for the objective. Now, the word objective here means your business objectives. And the way you make this possible is by making trade-offs. Everything you do is going to be a trade-off of one thing over the other. That could be things like cost, it could be reliability, could be maybe making some sacrifices on time to market to get the features right for your customers. So objective here really is about balancing trade-offs for your own business needs. And the thing that's sometimes not clear is it actually applies not only to technology, but also people and process. Everything we talk about today, you also must apply to people and process. The team that I'm in, Cloud Optimization, well, what do we offer and what will we cover today? We have two frameworks. So one of them is the Cloud Optimization Framework. The other is the Well-Architected Framework. Most of what I will talk about will be foundational guidance that comes from these two frameworks. We also have a couple of tools. So we've got the Well-Architected Tool, the Trusted Advisor Tool, and the AWS Health set of tools. One of our speakers will take you through some of those tools and how you can use them. You've heard me say a couple of times now that it's a journey, right? Why is it a journey? Why do you need to think about it as a life cycle? Why are you here? Well, best practices change over time. Nothing is static. Industry trends drive new innovations. Industry trends drive you to adopt new services, and your workloads will naturally evolve over time. Think about as you deliver for your customers, you add features, you change things, you have launches that go on pretty continuously, hopefully, right? And so how do you keep up with all these changes? It's really important to make sure that you optimize your use of cloud continuously over time. And it's an incremental process, incrementally building maturity to maximize the benefits you can get and to support your business outcomes. So if I follow the guidance from the two frameworks I mentioned, so Well-Architected and Cloud Adoption Framework, It's made up of phases, and these phases are part of incremental improvement. So you'll see it's drawn as some stairs. Think about it as taking chunk or bite-sized pieces and moving up through each phase one at a time. The mistake or an anti-pattern that we sometimes see is customers try to do all of it at once. You don't need to do that. Start small, start slowly, experiment at lower scale, and as you grow skills and maturity across your organization, you climb that sort of ladder of improvement. And where we want you to get to is continuous improvement. And again, as a reminder, it applies not only to tech, but also people and process. So let's take a look at these phases in a little more detail, right? The journey to cloud maturity is a phased approach, and unfortunately, you'll probably hear me say phase and stage interchangeably. They mean the same thing. They're not really, the wording isn't really too well defined for my talk today, so I'm going to say both, but I mean the same thing. But the idea is what you learn in one stage builds upon the next stage, and as you learn more and as you grow skills over time, you improve your skills, your expertise, and your knowledge of that, of what you're doing at that point in time. So think about builders across your business, right? Maybe it's you in the room, maybe a couple of you are direct application owners, maybe some of you are from something like a cloud center of excellence, maybe some of you are here as business decision makers. The biggest part that we want you to take away from today when you think about cloud optimization is you have to bring all your builders along. You have to get sponsorship from your leaders, so it comes right from the top, from CTOs, from your execs, and right from the bottom. And as you progress slowly over time, you start to build on skills, expertise, and experience as you progress, right? So what we see is this kind of push to increase our abilities over time. And once you're in an autonomous stage, you want to drive what we call continuous improvement. So if I go into some of the details of what these phases are made up of, this isn't a completely, it's not all-inclusive, and you should go and read the frameworks and learn about the details that we'll show, but here's some of the things that you may want to consider during these phases. So the first one, which we'll call the exploration phase, and by the way, don't worry too much about the wording here. So the names of the phases that I'm showing on these slides is not too important, because what is important is going to the frameworks themselves, reading the guidance, making sure you implement it in a way that makes sense for you. And we've got 5 stages here. You may want 3, you may want 7. You should take what is applicable to you from this talk and make it your own. It's really about giving you the guidance on how to think and what to do long term, but make it your own. You can customize it. So right early on in the exploration phase, it also doesn't have to be something that is applying to your entire company. It could be one team, one set of builders. It's okay to have, across a large business, different teams who are at different phases of this optimization journey, right? And so in the exploration phase, this is where you're looking at cloud computing concepts. You're experimenting maybe with small-scale projects, you're doing some POCs, and you should already be looking into what services cost. So the first thing you're going to do, fire up the AWS cost calculator, punch in some things of what you think you're going to need for this POC, and get an idea of cost. As you think about exploring and expanding more across your organization, you'll also want to think about governance already at this stage. And what you need to do now is think about how you're going to build a cloud governance model. What are your organizational policies? What are the important things that are non-negotiable to you that you want all your teams and all your builders to consider and use? Maybe you like less constraint. Maybe you are focused on innovation and you're okay with your builders sort of doing their own thing to a degree. Maybe you're not. And that depends on the industry you're in. It depends on regulation. So right in the beginning, when you're starting with POCs and early stage, you need to be thinking about what are the constraints you want to put in for your teams. Moving into the foundational phase, here's where you're really focusing on what your cloud strategy is. You're starting to develop it. You're starting to create some structure around the use of cloud across your organization. You're laying foundational infrastructure. And some of the things you already want to consider doing now, this early on, are things like shared logging, shared networking, any services that may need to be delivered across applications teams, across regions, that sort of thing. Things like central authentication. Are you using CloudWatch, CloudTrail? Start thinking about that. You don't necessarily have to implement it right now, but you should have a plan as you get to critical mass of use that's being used. The next stage is what we call the intermediate phase, and here's where you actually start to design and architect on cloud. So you're actively reading best practice, you're actually reviewing architectures, you're starting to build. From a governance perspective, between these two stages is where you're really focusing on cost management policies, resource tagging policies. May sound like a bit of a repetitive thing here from me, but the earlier you start thinking about this, the better your long-term success. How many of you have multiple accounts in your AWS environment today, and you're trying to do a true-up of the accounting and who the costs belong to based on cost centers or, okay, yeah, a lot of you. So it's important to make sure you use something like tagging and implement some sort of policies to make sure that there's adherence to that this early on, right? So the next one is really getting into the sort of advanced stage. Here you're building, deploying, thinking about things like getting to CI/CD pipelines. Maybe you've got automated self-service deployment tools. So you've got some sort of landing zone internally that your business users can go to and request a new account. You are conducting regular architecture reviews to ensure alignment with best practice. And this part's very important, and we are going to touch on this a bit later. But the important thing here is that understanding best practice for everything you do, whether it's people, process, or technology, is not a single point in time thing. It's something you've got to continuously do all the time. Anytime there is a change to a workload, anytime something new is launched, there should be a degree of some sort of review or discovery of the state of that application. And as you move through to the sort of autonomous stage, this is where we say you are now ready for continuous optimization. And continuous optimization is optimizing your cloud operations with mature processes, continuous improvements, driving innovation. Here you're really focused on things are working well. You want to focus on features, deployment, time to market, that sort of thing, so you can innovate for your own customers. So going through these phases, we're going to get to the point, hopefully in the fullness of time, we're going to get to the point of continuous optimization, right? And as you move through and past the autonomous stage, you need to make sure you prioritize continuous improvement. And here's the why. There is an assumption that as you move through and your skills and your team's expertise and experience has grown, there's an assumption that you'll sort of plateau, but you'll keep up to date with changes in the industry and changes to your workloads, and things will be okay. What we want you to do is be at this blue line. So you'll see the blue line, even though it decelerates a bit, it's still trending upwards. We want you to actively put effort into making sure that you strive for continuous improvement. The assumption is, well, if I don't, then I'll just plateau, and maybe that's okay, and maybe that's a trade-off you're willing to make. But what I'd like to tell you is, we find that's not what happens. We find what really happens is you get into a state of decline, and that's because of the things I said a couple of slides ago, right? The only constant is change, and if you're not keeping up with those changes and you're not letting your builders invest time in learning, you will see that there's some decline in your skills and your ability to execute. Once I move through all these stages, you're getting to the point of continuous optimization, and at that point, it is a repeating life cycle. So taking some guidance here from the Well-Architected Framework, it's really about making sure that you take learnings across multiple teams. Or maybe I should ask a question. How many of you have one single team in your whole business doing every single thing in cloud? Okay, maybe one or two. How many of you have multiple teams doing all the things, building the applications? Yeah, right. So that should be most of you. Good. Knowledge sharing is really critical here. And if you're a small company, sharing knowledge between people is pretty easy. It's your builders making decisions. It's people actually doing the work. And it's pretty easy to share knowledge if everyone's sitting closer together. But what if you are a larger organization? What if you've started to build new applications in cloud, your business is growing, your use of cloud is growing, and you now have this sort of large federated organization? Or maybe you're doing migrations and you're already a large organization. As companies grow, so do the complexities of things like operations, governance, and knowledge sharing. And you may have one team that's very innovative. There's often a pretty common pattern of this happening when we talk to customers, right? There's one team that's sort of pushing the envelope on innovation, and they do things in the corner by themselves, but other teams are left behind. And the most important thing to consider there, which I'll show you in a sec, is as one of these teams learns and goes through this life cycle, they actually share that knowledge with others. So it's continuous improvement, and it's a life cycle. How does that life cycle look? So we've gone through these phases. This is maybe one of the teams who's really advanced, really autonomous. Every time there is some sort of change in your environment, whether it's someone's cut a ticket to check something, whether it's a new workload, whether it's just a feature change or a feature launch, you should be thinking about doing some semblance of this life cycle, right? There are quite a few phases here. We will go through them. There's 5 or 6. If you decide you only want to use 3, great, do that. At least start with something. Use a small chunk, take what works for you and make it your own. So again, it's a lifestyle. It's not a moment in time. Initial reviews are not enough because if I do a review of a new workload and it gets deployed and later down the line you have some builder changes, someone leaves, new people join, and the state of that workload changes, do you even know about it? So the first part of how we see this working is we call this the learn phase. And this is something that is maybe overlooked because as you prioritize speed and make trade-offs, you may want to have your builders focus on feature launches instead of learning. But learning is probably the most important foundational part of this because here's where you actually understand the best practices. So if any of you how many of you have read the Well-Architected Framework? Okay, awesome. How many of you have read through the Cloud Adoption Framework? Okay, so for those of you that have not read through the Well-Architected Framework, I would suggest you take an action item after this week. It's a busy week, I know. There's going to be lots of action items. I would love it if you went and read the operational excellence pillar first. And the reason is some of the things that Charles will show you, who's one of the next speakers, are to do with tooling and automation. It's pretty easy to get some reporting and, once you've done centralized logging and moved through the stages and you're nice and mature, it's pretty easy to, get a snapshot view of the state of all your environments. But there are no API calls for your people. And until there's an API call for people, you're going to have to make sure you prioritize building your processes and your operations around people. So the first thing you should do is go read the operational excellence pillar. The very 2 best practices from that pillar are evaluate external customer needs and evaluate internal customer needs. Sounds simple, right? Invoke key stakeholders, bring business, bring development, bring operations teams to determine where your focus is. The next might be the security pillar. And here's where you determine your focus and your priorities based on your business objectives. As you make trade-offs, maybe you're okay to start fast and sacrifice on some cost. When you repeat the cycle, you can come and optimize cost in the next phase. The next one is measure. So we've now learned about the best practices. We understand what they are. Measure is, I'm actually now going to ascertain what my workload state is and how it compares to what best practice should be. So let's say central security teams. Security teams often rely on things like logging and findings to analyze any events that may indicate things like unauthorized access or unintentional changes happening across workloads, accounts, organizations. So you typically go through the view and it would say to you, hey, are you logging events effectively today? Now you know the answer. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. You need to do a mix of automated discovery and conversational discovery. More on that later. But the focus of measuring is really to understand what your workload state is in comparison to the actual learning, the actual knowledge part. The next is to prioritize. Identify. So when a best practice is or is not followed, there are anti-patterns and there are risks that you can incorporate or inherit by not following specific best practices. So for example, if I take the reliability pillar, and a common anti-pattern we see is using IP addresses instead of domain names for locating services. I mean, how many of you have done that? You remember the whole thing of moving on-prem from IP address days? I still do that. I have a network at home. It's still following that anti-pattern, but the risk of failure at home is far lower than a massive production system. So you want to make sure that you identify the risk of implementing or not implementing that specific best practice in this case. Once you've done that, that's where it comes down to prioritization. So here's what I said a few slides ago. The ones you prioritize, the things you decide to implement, build, architect, or remediate are based on your business priorities. You don't have to do everything. You need to do the ones that are going to either cause you some sort of, you or your customers, some sort of pain, or make it easier, make your applications more cost effective. So maybe you identified you have an opportunity to change the way you build certain workloads, and maybe you could be more specific, giving guidance across your organizations about things like data classification. How many of you on day one, I mean, hopefully it's always day one for you, but how many of you, when you were early along in the cloud adoption journey, thought about data classification? Good, I see some banking customers, fantastic. For the rest of you, it's not top of mind, right? Maybe as you start to federate your business and you start to allow teams more autonomy, you should think about data classification. Things like networking as well. So we talked about central networking. We talked about things like the IP address anti-pattern. Here's where maybe so let's say we've picked up those two things. We need to implement some sort of data classification policy or governance rules, and we need to make sure that networking is managed on behalf of the rest of the builders in the organization. But let's say you also identified some performance improvements you could make. Here's where prioritization is important. What are the most important things to mitigate or implement right now, and what can you put off until later? Famously, some of our best customers will prioritize things like security patching over new feature launches. Maybe that works for you, maybe that's good. You should decide what works for your business. And finally, the last one is once you've made those actual priorities, now's when you do the improvements. So here's where you're actually doing the work. Now, part of moving between sort of the measuring and improving phases is understanding what these risks are, learning about risks, learning about the things that are best practices and the reasons why. And the big factor here is knowledge, right? It's knowledge, it's skills, it's expertise in using this technology. And we recognize that it takes resources, it takes headcount, it takes budgets. There are trade-offs you're making operationally as well in your business. So it's important that you have mechanisms to drive this prioritization, and it's important that you, very crucially, share your learnings across to other teams, because the things you've learned, the improvements you've made, can be applied to other workloads in time, but they can also be applied to other teams in time. So again, as I said, maybe there's one really good high-skilled team who's doing everything and they just seem to innovate faster than everybody else. They should be sharing knowledge back to you. What you'll hear from Jeff, from Accor, is they have this notion of architecture patterns that they actually publish and share between each other. I won't take from Jeff, I'll let him cover it, but the sharing of the knowledge is super important. And of course, anything made, any lessons learned from other teams can also be applied back to the original team. So as you move through these stages, I think it's pretty common. We're pretty lucky. We get to talk to customers all the time. So thanks all of you for being here and for talking to us. What we see sometimes is customers will say to us, well-architected is very useful. I need to understand certain things from the workload, but it takes time. And what I want to tell you is it's up to you to prioritize how much time you spend understanding the state of your workloads. And there are two different ways that you can do this. So typically you need to do some kind of exploration to figure out, who's doing what. Are you using central logging? What are the immediate things that stick out from things like your metrics? Are you following observability best practices, that sort of thing? But again, what about the parts that don't have an API call, the people? So environmental and workload exploration for us is, again, something that covers technology, people, and process. But there are two ways you can do this. You should do both all the time. And yes, of course, you can prioritize one over the other. The first is what we call automated discovery. So that's tools, things like Trusted Advisor, Service Screener, anything really that gives you a good automated view of the state of your workloads. It could be alerts, it could be CloudTrail, it could be CloudWatch feeding into some kind of custom QuickSight dashboard you've built. But it's really about events and automation. A nice pattern here, not to take from Charles, who will show you more of the tools, but a nice pattern that we see here is when something happens in your account, trigger an event to prompt a person to actually take an action in your organization. But that doesn't often give you the complete picture, because again, there's the human element, and that's what we call conversational discovery. So it's very important to do both. Conversational discovery is, pulling all the stakeholders that you have for a specific workload. Could be somebody from the security team, could be somebody from the central networking team, and that workload or application owner. And there is a degree of where you do need to get them together, run through a set of questions to understand why certain decisions were made, and so on. And so typically we would say to customers that you'd look into the org structure of the team that supports that workload, understanding things like escalation paths, what sort of support processes do I have, and follow that chain to bring those builders in. And so with that, I will hand over to our next speaker, who will talk you through some of the tools.
Thanks, brother. Hi, everyone. So let's deep dive maybe in the tools we can use in your cloud optimization journey. So let's start first with the conventional way. So there are two ways to do it: automated, conventional. So first, conventional way is really focus and resonate with what we said: people and process. So not technology, people, process. That's the key topic here. And firstly, when our AWS starting the questions, are you well architected? It was, in fact, in 2012, so long time ago. And it's really the starting point of the well-architected framework that Bradley talked before. In fact, it was inspired by our internal way of working, how we handle incidents, but especially how we avoid them as much as possible. So the well-architected tool available since 2018 in the console. So also a few years ago, but again, it's constantly update. I think almost 1,000 updates since going available for everyone for free in the console. It's really a tool that will help you in the conversations with the stakeholders, with all the questions and answers, design principle. You can have best practices. For those that you know already, the well-architected, based on 6 pillars. So we have the operational excellence, security, reliability, performance efficiency, and cost optimizations. And the last one, sustainability. So what are the key benefits of the well-architected tool? So first, the architecture guidance. Second will be the in-workflow best practices. You can measure also your improvement. And then also it will enhance the collaborations you can have within your team. So what kind of features I like in the well-architected? I have, in fact, 4 of them. The first one is the lens. So who know the lens within the well-architected? Yes, Brad? Yes, cool. I see some of you that know that. So lens, in fact, will help you get specific questions, specific best practices that match with a specific domain or specific industry. So it could be domain like serverless analytics, but it could also industry specifics like finance, healthcare. So you have different lens for that that will be specific to your environment, in fact. The second one is the custom lens. So same as the classic lens, but here you can bring your own specific needs in terms of business. So you can add your own questions, your own best practices, that then you can share it with all the organizations. The third one, profiles and review template. So that both features will help you accelerate, in fact, the review within your organizations. So it will accelerate the way that you do a review with the well-architected tool. And the last one will be milestone. So milestone, I will deep dive on that one. It will really help you to track improvement over time in your conversational discovery. So remind you that it's always a life cycle, so you need to do a review quite frequently. So you can use milestones, in fact, to measure your progress through these life cycles. You will track the improvements. You see that it's easy to go back, review what's changed in your architecture or within your applications, and you can share the learning across the teams. And for sure, it will you will have less risks. You will be more optimized. That's where we all want to go. But it could take times. So again, you can ask yourself, what are the trade-offs you want to make between speed? Because, in fact, a full well-architected review could take up to 8 hours. And the minimum number of risks you are willing to accept. So again, that could take several months to have these reflections. Now, let's switch to automated discovery and what kind of tools we can use here, focus on the technology. And this one is Trusted Advisor. So Trusted Advisor is really the go-to service for optimizing your AWS environments, and it will provide you real-time guidance to help you align with the AWS best practices across 5 key domains. First, cost optimizations. Second, security. Third, performance, fourth, resilience, and service limits. So it will check within your AWS account automatically up to 482 best practices for business, for those that have business supports or higher. And by default, it will check 56 different best practices in your account. So again, the best practices activated, so you will have data and also best practices to implement. So it will check that automatically for you based on the well-architected tool, and it will also help you doing the well-architected review because you will have that data within your tool. It gives you these actionable recommendations, so it really helps you on what you will do, what you need to do within your applications to mitigate the risk. And also, it offers the way to implement automations based on those risks that are raised by Trusted Advisor and do automations. So typically, you can react automatically to any events, such as service limits, for example, that you can have within your account. When you reach that limit, you can automate it the way that you ask for a raise of that limit automatically. Again, here still focus on automated discovery, still on technology. And this one is Service Screener. So Service Screeners is an open source tools developed by the folks at AWS since 2021 that will run automated check within your AWS environment, and again provide you AWS recommendations based on the well-architected framework. It's based on Python and AWS SDK. It will run multiple API calls to determine the configurations of your environments. So it could be RDS, Aurora, S3, etc. And you get, at the end, snapshot analysis in your AWS environment like that with this dashboard. But again, here there are a trade-off. It's not managed services, so you have to build it, you have to run it, you have to do your own automations and integration with that tool. So we saw before how we can discover manually or in an automated way your workload in terms of explorations. Let's see now how we can activate your proactive mode, again, in an automated way. So here I will talk about AWS Health. AWS Health is really your authoritative source to get real-time informations about AWS Service Health. There are two kinds of events you can get from AWS Health. One will be account-specific, and the other one will be public event. So account-specific means all the events that are really focused, tailored to your AWS account or your AWS organizations. So it will provide you exact details about affected resources within your AWS account. And public event, for sure, will cover the broader service issue that can happen for all the AWS customers. So it's really to help you troubleshoot incidents quite quickly and effectively. So it will provide you actionable insight to help you manage that services at scale. And for example, there are scheduled changes that you can see in AWS Health. So scheduled changes could be, for example, a MySQL engine end of support, or it could be a Kubernetes engine end of support. So it can happen. And for that kind of event, you will get an alert from AWS Health. And what you can do, you can trigger emails or starting a chat with your team automatically with the correct team, with the ops team, for example, for Kubernetes, say, okay, guys, you need to update the kube engine because we are reaching the end of support. But you can also do it in more automated way to get maybe not one-to-one conversations, but integrate that within your tool, within your management tooling to raise a ticket to the correct team and manage it again at scale. So now I would like to introduce Geoffroy or Jeff for the US guys that will talk about Accor and how we do cloud optimizations. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bradley. Thank you, Charles, for this presentation and inviting me to this breakout session. So I'm super happy to be with you today and to share our cloud journey. So I'm Geoffroy Renaud, being in Accor for 11 years. Firstly, started as a security engineer, and for the past 3 years, being cloud principal architect. So Accor is a French company with my French accent. It's a global leader in hospitality industry with a portfolio of more than 45 brands, including luxury, mid-scale, and economic segments. Over more than 5,700 hotels and also more than 10,000 restaurants and bars. You may know some of our brands like Fairmont, Raffle, Pullman, or even Sofitel. So we are committed to a sustainable and responsible tourism. Remember back Bradley's slide? So how to ensure we have a proper answers to those questions? I think most of you have those questions in mind. Let's share our experience. So it's coming from real life inside a wild company. It's still in progress, but I hope it will resonate for you. So what is the context of the cloud in Accor? So it's a forced transformation. COVID disrupted the hospitality industry. Overnight, no more travel, no more booking, and thousands of refund requests exposed the necessity of agility. What are our focus? Building adaptability, ensuring variability, scaling efficiently, and of course, sustainability. It's a deep transformation in terms of tech and business. So rethinking how hospitality operates, changing how we work, embracing test and learn with more room for mistakes. Let's speak about the seed of the well-architected in Accor. So we started like everyone with a proof of concept, a single AWS account, and we discover how deep the cloud will impact our way of working. On our journey, we started with a small workload to migrate our big data. And during this phase, we discovered the well-architected framework led at this stage by AWS, making the global interview with their own tool reserved for solution architect. So it was a very enriching learning experience. It was the first time we saw the application as a 360-degree overview. After, we moved to a second phase where we started our cloud center of excellence called in Accor Welcome Cloud in order to onboard projects and people that want to come in cloud. So it was during this stage where shared responsibility model, lifecycle, and at scale starting to be my daily keywords that I spread on each meetings. We made multiple migration acceleration programs with our loyalty stack, our call center, and other more. But at this stage, the well-architected framework was still seen as a gate, like we don't miss any big rocks. And it was carried out by our map partner. So inspired from this review, we imagined to create like an easy, a simple version for us to be able to sensibilize. But finally, we weren't able to use it, and furthermore, to collect and follow the data. Last stage, during 2021, we made, with the enterprise architecture, the first cloud-first strategy. So we put in place an application portfolio management in order to maintain our application landscape, but also to support our ambition through various migration strategies. And we were able to begin our move to cloud by the end of the year. So move to cloud reset phase was during 22 to 23. It was a massive lift and shift migration, but only based for cost saving and cost avoidance. We moved this program to be seen also as a first transformation program to upgrade our cloud maturity and to be prepared to work at scale. So let's start horizontally on the technical part. So it's a lift and shift where we have very different IT systems around the world. So more than 45 headquarters, head office, server rooms, and multiple data centers that we need to migrate. We created 6 new regions in few months: Paris, Bahrain, Singapore, Sydney, Sao Paulo, and Ohio. And we give the same shared services with a kind of hybrid version to be able to continue to work with the current technology in hotel and to be prepared to work on cloud. On the vertical part, it's more the organizational. So we reach with our Cloud Center of Excellence and Ninja team the limits. So AWS advised to move and to upgrade finally to what we call Cloud Business Office, CBO, and Cloud Platform Engineering, CPE. And with this, we were able to start to accelerate the cloud adoption for business. In order to continue, we put in place a weekly meeting and a centralized architecture review board. So it wasn't only like an architecture review, but more an operational review where all the stakeholders could participate, learn, discuss, and check how to meet our target. So we firstly started with all those platforms that we built, and we moved after on each application review. Sometimes you can't meet your new finalist standard, and for this purpose, we create a security waiver. So a process to rightly follow the security exception with the application owner to be sure that we will first achieve to close the data center, but also to have a very detailed planning to be sure to meet our target expectation. So we used the well-architected framework, but not on each application, like working only on similar application pattern to reduce the time of review. What was behind the architecture review board? So to manage the right discussion, we used architectural decision records. So an ADR is a log decision made by teams. Decision can be like, what database should I use for my workload? Which network topology? How my partner can connect to my application? So we need to establish a proper option list with all the rationale, but more important are the consequence of our choices. An ADR can be a very powerful tool linked to the architecture review board. It supports better communication and alignment. It's also bound to a context that can make change during the life cycle. So it's easy to answer the question about, okay, it's legacy. And it can help to manage the at-scale, reusing the similar pattern for similar context. So ADRs have 3 business outcomes. You can align current and future team member. It can set a strategy direction for the project and the product. And sometimes we can avoid anti-pattern definition at the start. Let's come back to the magic wheel of the continuous improvement. So here, the topic of knowledge is really important. It's a topic of education and coaching to be sure we will share and make some learning. To have a well-architecture at scale, it's really important to have the common knowledge and values across the team, looking for the same directions. So it can start with training, sensibilization, but also with certification. With all those material of the well-architected framework, finally, you have this common mindset. Of course, what is really important is the library, but make events and give a free space for team to grow with a sandbox. How to create a good feedback loop. So you need to collect as much data as possible. So we are trying to identify, for example, in the build phase, using our code factory, scanning infrastructure as code to collect those information, but also in a large company to check with your ITSM, the change management, the information like this, and the work we are making with a well-architected tool to collect those information. After, there is the run phase. So we are creating a tool on top of all those information, like AWS Trusted Advisor, AWS Health, but also with our cloud security posture management. So all the information, all the assessment of the security will come in a single place to have more visibility. FinOps are very important, and we need also to imagine what are the service level objectives. We need to find where it goes well and where it goes wrong. After, it's the analysis phase. So all those data is very important to identify what are your issues. And Cloud Business Office can work closely to the cloud platform engineering to use this data, starting from identify and after to be able to prioritize the roadmap. So alignment of the roadmap with the business, it's made during our PI planning. But there is two kinds of personas. For sure, all the governance to see and oversee the cloud. But it's also important to make it as a self-service for the team, seeing only their perimeter and to be able to create their own backlog. So now, improvements through standardization. So what are the deliverables? We want to increase our cloud maturity each time. So sharing some new or updating template, blueprints, and also our technical architecture document. And after, how to make it at scale. We should automatize or consume. So we can make this with guardrail, making everything possible in a shift left during your CI/CD. And of course, if you have a CPE, to build products that will be directly consumed by different teams. So prospective. So we have a strong focus on our CBO maturity to rightly serve the business. So it should be structured enough in order to find the right balance between governance and autonomy, and to be able to give more space for teams. We need also to manage the right level of IRB, because making those architecture decisions, you can go very deep on each detail, each decision. But what is important, it's only to define what global impact should be met at the governance. A global impact can be like a selection of which PKI should I use for my workload, and local impact for teams is more something very easy that is inside a product. So well-architected framework in a self-service. So the work we are doing with Charles is to continue to help the team making education and support. But what is very important for us is to be able to shift this responsibility, to be seen not like an auditor, but more as a coach to encourage the autonomy and the accountability. After, we can speak about all those data. We are creating more dashboards in order to measure, identify, and prioritize. On our side, we create a product called Accor Cloud Platform, ACP Advisor. So unfortunately, I can't share today some beautiful dashboard, but it's a way we will be able to identify the pattern and the anti-pattern. And like we mentioned, with the different discussion we have with team and the data we collect, I think we will be able to make this reality check between the reality and the auto-assessment. So thank you very much for listening to me. I would be happy to discuss and share more in private if you have some questions.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.